Okay, so when you want to trace your pattern, you can just use normal copy paper from a photocopier, or for today I'm going to use tracing paper just because it's easier to see. But if you don't have any, normal paper works just fine. You just have to be able to see the pattern underneath. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see how I trace the pattern. Okay, so what you want to do is we're starting from the front, from the back down to the front. Okay, so I'm starting with these pieces here and the moon. You want to trace each piece so you can cut it out. You can obviously free cut your pieces as well. Like if you want to change the shape of the trees here, you can do them any shape. So this is just for if you're wanting to do the exact pattern. And you'll probably notice on my embroideries that some of them are slightly different to the pattern just because that's how it turned out. So as I'm tracing, I want to go over this tree here. So I traced that one and you can see they're so tiny. Okay, so I actually want to go below and make the tree a little bit longer so that it sits under the layer underneath. Okay, and so I can't just keep tracing because I need each piece to be separate. So I need to move it slightly over to draw this next piece. So I go around it, I go a bit lower, and then I sort of have to make an imaginary line of where I think the tree goes, because that'll go underneath the one next to it. Move it over again, draw this tree, go a little bit lower. So I have 3 trees there. So I have 3 trees and 3 separate trees here because that's what I want to cut out. So then I might do the moon. You can do them all close together to save your paper. And circles are quite hard to trace. It's hard to get them perfect circles. So you might even want to trace something that's circular to get that perfect. But remember, it is fabric collage. I don't think it's meant to be perfect. I quite like it when it's not exactly perfect. Okay, so moving on to the field here. So I'm doing this first field. I find it easier to lie this flat edge against the side so I don't have to worry about tracing that. And I'm going to go across this front, the top of this field here, behind the house. And then I'm going to go slightly further, this imaginary line where I think the field is going to go. And I want to go down, probably about down to this length to draw across. So that's the size of the piece that I'll cut out for that piece. So even though you only see this bit, it just helps to, rather than just cut out that little section, I cut out that whole piece. It's a lot easier to cut out, but it also means that other things can overlap it. So sticking with the fields here, the hills, I'm going to do the next hill down. So this one will be in front of the last piece. So I trace it, I keep going again, and I go slightly underneath the hill below it. So you can see this line here, that hill there is going to go in front of that, just by a couple of millimeters. You can obviously make them a bit longer. And I do the next one. So this is the full size of the 3-inch square. So I'm going right across, and you can use a ruler here or you can just free draw it if you want to. Okay, and then this one is going to go down to here. My calendar is slightly cut off. This was my example one. I actually don't have the one that you have. I've changed it since then, but that's the large piece. And then you've got one more piece down here. Now I don't need to add any extra hemline, like seam allowance on this, because this is at the very front of the miniature. So it can sit right on top. So I'm not covering any of that up. So as you can see, oops, I'm not showing that very well. As you can see, I've got all my pieces there. Okay, and now I can get into tracing. I'll do it back up here in this space, the house and the bushes behind the house. So let's do this one. So I'll trace the bush here, but it actually will go behind the house a little bit and a bit below. That's one. And then I've got another one here. So these bits are really fiddly. So sometimes I don't even bother tracing them in my design, just free cut them if you want. it's not going to make that much of a difference. Okay, so I've got 3 little bushes there, and then I've got my house. So I don't need to trace the windows or anything. I'm going a bit below the hillside so that hillside will overlap, and then I just want to trace the roof. Now I wouldn't bother even tracing the door because it's so tiny, so you can just cut a little piece of fabric for the door. And then the last thing that's easy to forget is this path. Now I don't need to add any seam allowance onto the path either, because that is going to sit directly on top of this hillside. Here we go. So there you go. They're all the pieces that I need. Now you can see that they're really small. You might even want to label them so that you know. I'll get this plain bit of paper so you can see, so that you know what they are. House, roof, bush 1, bush 2, bush 3. The path is pretty easy. The moon, you might do 1, 2, 3, and then you could even label the layers. First layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer. That's just to help you. But it's so small, so if you had to trace it again, or it's easy enough to do. So I hope that makes sense. So I just wanted to clarify that it's easier to do it that way. You can just trace each separate piece, but if you give a little bit of a seam allowance, so you got to start thinking in layers. So from the background through to the foreground, which is at the front, and that's how you're going to layer your fabrics. So I hope that makes sense. I'll then cut these out. What I actually do is I do one at a time, because otherwise you'll lose all your pieces. So the easiest way is to say cut the moon, cut that first, put it in a little Ziploc bag, because then it helps you keep all your pieces together. And then you can throw away these pattern pieces unless you're going to do another one. So I hope that clarifies anything. Any questions, feel free to send me a message or make a comment below.